Alright, so I already made a video about Milan Melindo talking about, if he beats Ryota Taguchi, he's the fighter of the year. He's not my fighter of the year, he's the fighter of the year. If you're paying attention to boxing, to who's fighting the best, to who's fighting the stiffest opposition, he is the fighter of the year if he beats Taguchi. Now, should he happen to lose to Taguchi, that doesn't make Taguchi necessarily the fighter of the year because he will have had a win over Robert Barrera. It's a good win, yes, but not necessarily as scintillating as somebody I'm about to get to. And then, of course, over Melindo, who I actually favor him to defeat. So technically, he should beat Melindo. Melindo's largely getting credit by virtue of the fact that he's going into the fight with Taguchi as the underdog. Now, Kenshiro is the man that I'm talking about for this video. 11-0 with 5 knockouts. Became a world champion in his 10th fight. Won Ganigan Lopez for the WBC Light Flyweight Championship. Very, very rugged, experienced fighter from Mexico. Very skilled fighter. Very skilled fighter. A guy that fights out of the southpaw stance, goes to the body really well. Has a very awkward style. He's almost like a miniature version of like Miguel Vasquez. That's pretty much the way he fights. He's not the stereotype of a Mexican slugger, an offensive slugger. He's a little bit more technical, very tricky, very just kind of slippery and difficult to deal with by and large. Good jab and good setup, good timing for his shots and everything. Shiro was able to edge him in a very close fight. He got a majority decision. He followed that up with fighting against Pedro Guevara, who himself was a former WBC champion and who himself, Guevara, had defeated Ganigan Lopez before. Guevara happened to be the champion. He had knocked out Akira Higashi to win the vacant version of the WBC title back then, and he made a second defense against Ganigan Lopez, who he defeated by unanimous decision. It was a competitive unanimous decision, but it was one that Guevara certainly deserved. Guevara wound up fighting against another fighter from Japan named Yu Kimura, and pretty much lost what frankly amounts to a bit of a robbery. He won the fight. Guevara really deserved the decision against Kimura. Kimura wound up winning a split decision against him in Japan. And Guevara, he fought his way back into the rankings, defeated another former champion in Oswaldo Novoa, former 105-pound champion, and he made his way back to being a title contender. Kimura was summarily defeated by Lopez following that, and then Lopez, of course, lost to Shiro, as I mentioned earlier. So Shiro was going to be fighting against a guy in Guevara who was still a top-tier level guy, a guy that had beaten Ganigan Lopez more clearly than Shiro himself had. So it's a very, very difficult opponent. I favor Guevara going into the fight. I think it was pretty evenly matched between where a lot of people rated the two of them, though. I think a lot of people were rating Shiro a bit more off of the eye test, the quote-unquote eye test, as opposed to Guevara, who had really put in a lot of work. He was a very experienced fighter going into that fight. He had over 30 fights, over 3 times as many as Shiro had. But Shiro went in there, and he managed to win the fight, man. He managed to win a very close fight. Once again, Guevara was actually outboxing Shiro in the early goings, but Shiro utilized his strength and very, very excellently placed body work, especially in the mid-rounds and in the later rounds, to really tire out Guevara. Guevara was... it was almost like watching a marathon running at the end of the marathon. Guevara was just like hoping it was going to be over, towards the end of it. And, for that effort, Shiro managed to get a majority decision over Guevara as well, just like he had done over Ganigan Lopez. He's going to be fighting against a fighter by the name of Gilberto Pedroza, coming up here on December 30th. This isn't mandatory defenses, it's actually an optional one. But Pedroza, for his worth, actually recently defeated, in a bit of an upset, another really good fighter out of Mexico, a fighter by the name of Saul Baby Juarez, who actually had been fighting to try and get himself back into contention, particularly to try and potentially get another title shot, as he had recently had about a year ago against Wenheng Manayoten, the currently now 49-0 Wenheng Manayoten. Juarez actually gave Wenheng a pretty good fight, one of the more competitive fights of Wenheng's career thus far. And he lost, of course. He wound up losing following that to Leroy Estrada and Gilberto Pedroza. And Pedroza is now going to be fighting against Shiro. Now, if Melindo just edges Taguchi and like say like he just edges him, and Shiro goes out there and just makes quick work and destroys Pedroza, I might be inclined to actually rate Shiro over Melindo. It really kind of depends on the manner of victory. It always depends on the manner of victory. I mean, really, if you're just rating a fighter, like saying like ahead of a fight, like, oh, if so and so beats this guy, and I actually might have made that mistake earlier in this video, interestingly enough. I'm my earlier statement was primarily based off of Melindo getting a clean win. Basically, if he gets a clean win, he's deserving of, whether it's on points or by knockout, then Melindo deserves the fighter of the year, the fighter of the year award. The props for it. If Shiro makes easy work of Pedroza and Melindo loses to Taguchi, then Shiro might deserve it. Ultimately, I think pretty much the one guy that's really tough to put pretty much anybody over really is Srisake Tsurungvisai. He did get the decision, close decision, mildly controversial decision over Roman Gonzalez in their first fight. And then he went on to knock out Gonzalez in their second fight in emphatic fashion. I mean, that's one of the knockouts of the year. If it was, it's not as graphic as, like, say, a Mikey Garcia versus Zlaticanin or a David Lemieux knocking out Curtis Stevens in that exchange. But insofar as what it meant to the division, to boxing, to pound for pound, etc., that's a hell of a knockout. It's a hell of a win, and it's something that things like Fighter of the Year awards were largely made for. So I mean, it really depends. If Shiro winds up having a decision, Pedroza and Melindo loses to Taguchi, then it should be Srisake Tsurungvisai. But once again, I just wanted to put it out there. There's more guys than you might think out there. For potential fighter of the year. I think the easy choice for a lot of people, especially based off of the recent notable win, is Vasyl Lomachenko. But for me, the Rigondeaux win, and I mean, you could even say both the Mariaga and the Sosa wins as well. I mean, there's certain things that you can kind of pick apart with the wins, but I do give him a bit more credit for the Sosa and the Mariaga wins than I do for the Rigondeaux wins. For reasons I won't necessarily go into in this video because it'll be another long-ass rant if I do. But just sticking to that. The other one, the other ones out there is Anthony Joshua, big win over Klitschko. Although he kind of struggled against Carlos Takam, and that'll probably count against him, as well as the fact that Klitschko had already been more handily defeated in a technical sense, maybe not as much of a physical sense, by Tyson Fury. And then there you also have like Terence Crawford, Terence Crawford, who has wins over Felix Diaz. Although similar to with Lomachenko, you can say, well, Diaz was weight drained. He had to drain him back down to 140 and everything, and he really wasn't the same fighter. Having to keep cutting the weight. Diaz really should have been a 147 pounder from that point on. And then Julius Ndongo, who was kind of, before that, relatively unproven. I mean, he had beaten Ricky Burns and Edward Troyanovsky. The Troyanovsky was just a first-round knockout. You can't really judge too much of a fighter's overall quality and character off of that, outside of the fact that, he has a reasonably big punch. And then the win over Ricky Burns, who, it's a good win, a solid win for what it's worth. But, Ricky Burns at the time was, one of the weakest title holders, one of the weakest belt holders in the sport. And Ndongo just pretty much relieved him of that. Or, one of the weaker contenders even, and Ndongo relieved him of that. So he went in there against Terence Crawford, and Crawford destroyed him. Crawford's another guy that I think is kind of an easy choice insofar as name value is concerned. But for me, Srisake, Ken Shiro, and Milan Melindo really, if Shiro and Melindo get the wins, and if they get the wins as the way in the fashion that I'm alluding to them getting the wins, they will deserve higher placement than both Lomachenko and Terence Crawford.
maybe only behind Srisaket, but even possibly arguably above them, above Srisaket, depending on how the fights play out, depending on how they look, how their opponents look, and so on and so forth, and the manner of victory, as I mentioned before. But that's it, man. Shiro, doing a fantastic job, man. He's not number one. He's not rated number one at 108 by TBRB for no reason. And I actually, insofar as like official results go, I would rank him there as well. Being able to decision both Lopez and Guevara, it takes some serious skills. It really does. And the funny thing about it is I actually don't even necessarily think that Shiro is technically as skilled as Lopez or Guevara. I think he was actually able to kind of force them into fights that they both weren't comfortable with. And so in that way, that's another skill as well, being able to place the advantages that you have upon your opposition and making them fight your fight when they really want to be a little bit more pot-shotting and hands-off with it. So, got to give props to Shiro, man. That's it for this one. I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.